Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the stereo delay section. This is a patch that's included in my Matriarch patch book. It's up on Patreon right now. I try to make these patches incorporate some of the idiosyncrasies of the Matriarch, so the patches can be more of learning tools as well as just fun ways to make interesting sounds. So if you're interested in those and being a part of the community, head on over to Patreon. The link's in the description. I'd really appreciate it. So the stereo delay, it's really amazing. I love the way it sounds. It's made up of two bucket brigade analog delay circuits. And in the signal path, it's located right after the VCAs and right before the signal gets put out through the mains. So I'm going to show you all the details of the delay and walk through some sound examples. And then we'll break down this patch a little bit more and I'll show you how it uses the delay to get interesting sounds. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button below and let's jump into it. Okay, back to the stereo delay. I've taken apart the patch and just set up a basic patch. So the stereo delay is amazing. It creates a lush and rich smooth delay sound. One of the things I really love about this delay module is how flexible it is. As I mentioned, there's two delay signals, the left and right channels, and you can adjust the time of those independently or together. The time knob obviously sets the initial time for both of the delay circuits, ranging from 35 milliseconds to 750 milliseconds. You can get longer delay times by using the tap tempo function, which I'll show you in a second, or by using the patch points. The manual indicates that it could lead to noisier trails and a lo-fi sound. I don't know if I would describe it that way, but either way, it sounds great. You can sync the time to another source by turning on this button right here. With nothing patched in or without using MIDI, it's going to sync up to the sequencer clock right here. When it is in sync mode, you'll notice that the light turns green as opposed to red. And then the time knob functions similarly to how the rate division knob works on the sequencer, in that it creates musical subdivisions of the clock rather than just a smooth transition of time. This spacing knob works very similarly to the spacing knob of the filter. When you turn the spacing knob up, the delay 1 time moves after the delay 2 time. When you turn it back, it moves before. And set right in the middle, they should be synced up. Feedback here routes a portion of the delay's output back into its input. In layman's terms, that just means that the delay is going to go on longer if you turn it clockwise. Once you get past 2 o'clock, then some feedback happens and the delay will actually self-oscillate. And if you want to really have some fun, you can patch from the keyboard CV out in the back into the time and use the keyboard to adjust it. The mix control obviously controls the mix between the dry sound at counterclockwise and the wet sound at clockwise. If we hit this ping pong button, then the delay will alternate between the left and right channels. So a lot of that is pretty straightforward. That's how delay modules work. Let's get into some of the more interesting parts of the delay module. So as far as patch points, these two inputs right here, delay in 1 and delay 2 in, are used if you want to use this module with external gears. So you can actually use this delay module with your Eurorack setup and not use anything else in the Matriarch if you want to. As I've said earlier in this series, I like to think of the Matriarch as a collection of modules, and this is a great example of why I think it makes sense to think about it that way. You can absolutely do that right here, and it can be used to process whatever signal you want to throw at it. The feedback CV will control this knob. There's another feedback CV in the back, and that makes it so that you can separate the two delays and you can control the feedback of both delay 1 and delay 2 separately. The Matriarch is normaled or hardwired that anything plugs into this patch point will then modulate both. If you plug into the feedback CV2 in the back, that will override that hardwire. We have the time control here that allows you to modulate the time of the delay. In true Matriarch fashion, you can modulate the delays separately. And when sync mode is on, remember that the time knob becomes subdivision. So when you modulate it, it creates that delay sync bend. So I've done a bit of deep listening trying to figure out exactly what that means. And I encourage you to try it as well. I think the best way to describe it is that the division will slowly move to the new division, almost like the glide or slew. So as you turn the knob in sync mode, the division moves from things like a quarter note to an eighth note. And because it's synced, that wouldn't be a smooth transition except for the way the Matriarch bends that CV. If you didn't have that and you had a longer delay feedback time, the delay pings from before you move the knob would be different from after, or the delay times would have to adjust. When just moving this knob, you can kind of hear everything move together. It has a slightly different effect in sync mode than when it's not in sync mode. At least that's my interpretation of it. I recommend playing around with it so you can kind of get that sort of sound in your ear. But that's why I created the patch at the beginning. It explores that a little bit. I'll talk more about that in a few seconds when we look at that patch. The last patch point is the mix in, and that just controls this mix. All right, let's head back to the patch and go over everything that was happening there. So we're back to the patch. I've got it all patched up again. And I'm just going to walk you through the different patch points. So first of all, what I've got going on with the oscillator section is I'm using frequency modulation to create some of those interesting tones. And if you'll notice in the mix section, oscillator 4 is turned all the way down. I've got oscillator 1, 2, and 3 turned up, and those are the only ones you're hearing. I am using oscillator 4, the wave out, to plug into the frequency modulation of the other three. Now, FM modulation is kind of touchy, and sometimes I think if you plug directly in, it just creates too much. So I wanted to attenuate it a little bit. So I have this coming out of the wave and into the attenuator. And if you'll notice, it's really not much. And you can turn it up I'm going to turn the delay all the way down so you can hear what it sounds like if I turn it up. So that's with nothing. That's with no frequency modulation at all. And as you can hear, once you start getting into that upper range, I just feel like it's just way too much. This also sounds really great percussively if you set it to be really short tones. So that's where I have it set. I'll turn this back to where it was before. To get this to the attenuated version of this, to send it out to the other 3 oscillators, I have it going up right here into this multiplier, and then the 3 outs of the multiplier go into each of the linear FM patch points. The oscillators cover a range of octaves from the lowest to 4 to 2, and I have them all synced together. I did adjust the frequencies of these two just to create some more dissonance with the sync. So that's what's going on with the oscillator section. Now, if you'll notice, I have both the times of each side of the delay module being modulated. And you can see that the time is a little bit, it changes a lot. It is synced and set to ping pong. And as I mentioned earlier, because it's synced, the time knob is creating that CV bend between the different stages. And so as these are getting modulated at different times, you'll hear it go in and out of sync. Now there's a bit of a signal path to how I'm modulating these. Let's start right here with this LFO. I have the triangle out going into this attenuator, and then it's being multiplied in 2 different directions. Number 1, it's modulating the time of the second delay circuit. And number 2, it's coming all the way back here to modulate the CV of this attenuator. This attenuator is taking the wave out of this modulation LFO, and it attenuates it and spits it out into the first one. So it's got this kind of interesting interplay where this LFO is modulating how much this LFO impacts delay 1, as well as modulating delay 2. So they're kind of connected, but also not. If I turn up the mix all the way, you can hear a little bit of that CV bend. And one thing I think is nice about this patch is if you want it to lock in, you can lower these 2 attenuators and it will suddenly lock it in. Or you could just unplug these patch points. So there you go, that's the patch. If you want patch diagrams of this patch and others like it, check out my Patreon page. It's a great way to support my channel, and the patch books are just a nice way to give back to my supporters. I really couldn't keep this up without so many people signing up to Patreon, so I would really appreciate it if you thought about doing that. Also, if you sign up to the highest level, Tier 3, I give away a DIY module once a month, and you can be automatically entered into that drawing if you sign up to Tier 3. In the next video, I'm going to go over the modulation section. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.